We all know Dolores Umbridge is evil. In fact, many Harry Potter fans consider her worse than Voldemort. So would it surprise you to know that Harry Potter himself had an insane theory that Voldemort was actually possessing Umbridge? In the Order of the Phoenix, we read all about Harry's first week back at school and his not one, but 4 detentions. By the end of these grueling nights with Umbridge, he walks away thinking that she might be more than just a simple ministry witch, and it's based on more than just a dislike for the woman. In fact, he has a very specific reason to support his claim. But unfortunately, the movie completely removed this detail and about a dozen others that build out our key characters and the plot as a whole. So in today's video, join me as we compare Chapter 13 of the Order of the Phoenix to the film adaptation and find everything that they left out or added to fit their new narrative. My name is Gibby and welcome back to episode 66 of Movies vs. Manuscripts Harry Potter Edition. Welcome to Factor Fantasy, your source for all things relating to the wizarding world of Harry Potter. If you're new here and enjoy deep dives into the books and movies, then consider subscribing. As for today though, we're continuing our journey through the Order of the Phoenix, and we've reached Harry's detention with Dolores. Trust me, there's a lot to cover, and although the climax of this moment is when Harry formulates this new theory, there are some other crucial details missing as well, like Ron getting on the Gryffindor Quidditch team. That's right, that happens in this book, despite the movie not showing it until year 6. But let's put a pin in that because I'm getting ahead of myself. Per usual, I'll cover all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's recap what happened in this brief scene of the movie, that way it's fresh on our mind for the analysis. Right after Harry has his outburst in Umbridge's first class, the movie cuts immediately to his detention. We see Umbridge making some tea and then greeting Harry, who comes in and sits down at a desk in her office. He goes to pull out his own quill, but Umbridge stops him and hands him one of her special quills. Harry then uses it to write the line, "I must not tell lies," as Umbridge has requested, and after a few lines, he realizes that the ink is blood, and it's coming out of his own left hand, which reveals the exact line that he's writing carved into his skin. Realizing what a barbaric situation he's in, Harry stops writing, and Umbridge walks around to him to see what's the matter. Harry says nothing, and Umbridge tells him that he's right to be quiet because deep down he knows that he deserves this. So Harry keeps writing, not wanting to give in to Umbridge's plan. The movie then cuts to the Gryffindor common room, where first years are trying sweets from Fred and George's skiving snack boxes, and we overhear Ron and Hermione talking as they walk into the room. Hermione tells Ron that she'll help him write the introduction of one of his essays for homework, but that's it. Ron then tells her that she's amazing, and then they both sit down next to Harry on the couch. Hermione spots Harry's hand and tells him that he needs to tell someone about what Umbridge has been doing to him, but Harry refuses. Hermione tries to tell him that it's pretty simple, but Harry tells her that this is anything but simple, and he storms off to bed. And that is where our scene ends for this week. So let's kick things off with our first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. First up for characters, we're missing our usual suspects plus a few extras. In the book, we read about Draco, Crabbe, Goyle, Pansy Parkinson, Parvati Patil, Lavender Brown, Ernie Macmillan, Professor Sprout, Professor Flitwick, Professor McGonagall, Professor Grubbly Plank, and then a few people from the Gryffindor Quidditch team like Angelina Johnson, Katie Bell, and Alicia Spinnet. Oh, and Lee Jordan is there as well. For the record, there are about a dozen more names and faces that are mentioned but don't have any speaking parts, but for the sake of simplicity, I've only listed the people who actually have a word or two to say in the book. Next, we have timeline. This week, there are 2 key differences. First, Harry actually has 4 detentions with Umbridge, not just 1. Starting on Tuesday night and going through Friday night, these take multiple hours each and get worse every time, as we'll see in the plot changes section, which is the second part of the timeline issues for this week, because the whole week is essentially removed. Chapter 13 covers everything about Harry's week from Tuesday through Friday, but we get none of it in the movie. And finally, for our first 3 categories, there's location, which sheds a lot of light on where some of these plot changes will be taking place. We're missing the Great Hall, Charms class, Transfiguration class, the Herbology greenhouses, and the Hogwarts grounds where they have Care of Magical Creatures class. Now, before we go diving headfirst into the plot changes, it's important to remember that my job here isn't to read things off the page word for word. Specifically, it's nearly impossible for me to address every single dialogue change. So if you're looking to relive these moments and the conversations for yourself, then I highly encourage you check out the audiobook on Audible. Using the link in the description, you can get your first audiobook for free and follow along with me every week. Also, I want to give a massive shout out to Jason, Joshua, Timothy, RoboSteve, Drix, Andy, Maha, and the rest of my incredible Patreon and YouTube members who help make these videos possible every month. And a special shout out as well to Danny, who just joined this past week. Now, with that being said, let's dive into our plot changes. To kick off our plot changes, it's important to remember that pretty much 99% of this chapter isn't in the movie. But per usual, instead of just chucking everything under one massive umbrella, "this got removed" change, I'll be separating the key points of the chapter out so they're easier to digest as individual omissions and plot changes. So, if you remember from the last episode, in Chapter 12, they ended with Harry talking to Professor McGonagall right after he got sent away by Umbridge from Defense Against the Dark Arts. Well, this chapter picks up pretty much right after that. His day still isn't done, and he still has to go to dinner, and we read at the beginning of Chapter 13 that the news was traveling exceptionally fast, even by Hogwarts standards. Pretty much everybody knew about his outburst at Umbridge in Defense Against the Dark Arts. Now, no one outside of his close circle had really heard Harry talk about what happened with Cedric that night in the maze, so this is kind of the first time that people are hearing about his claims directly. As Harry is walking through the Great Hall to get his dinner, he can hear students whispering about him and saying things like, he says he saw Cedric Diggory murdered, and he reckons he dueled with you-know-who, and who does he think he's kidding? People are obviously struggling to believe this far-fetched story that Harry supposedly dueled Voldemort and watched Cedric Diggory get murdered. Harry is incredibly confused by this reaction because he doesn't understand why none of them believe the story that Dumbledore told them 2 months ago at the end of year feast. He seems to think that people believed it back then, so he doesn't understand why they're acting up now. Hermione has to explain to him that she's not sure if they actually did believe it back then. It was such a massive shock when Cedric came back dead that nobody really stopped to question anything in the moment. But then they all immediately went home for a 2-month summer vacation where they were being told things by their parents or reading the Daily Prophet, which slowly made them start to doubt whatever Dumbledore had told them right before they left school. After she explains this, Harry gets quite loud and mad at Hermione, and she has to remind him yet again that she is on his side and to stop biting her head off. Our next omission comes when the trio returns from dinner to the Gryffindor common room. The moment they walk in, Hermione suddenly cries out, angrily asking a rhetorical question about how could Dumbledore let such a terrible woman teach them. Ron points out that Umbridge is trying to get people to spy for her, which makes Hermione snap back that that's obviously why she's there. Duh. Harry can immediately tell that they're about to start arguing again, so he shuts it down and tells them just to focus on their homework. I want to make a special note here because we'll touch on this again later, but in the movie scene, we see Ron and Hermione getting along perfectly, with Hermione even offering to write the introduction for one of Ron's essays. In the book, however, they are constantly bickering. I think the filmmakers decided to show them getting along nicely just to make it abundantly clear that Harry is the one having the angsty, moody year. If Ron and Hermione were also at each other's throats, it might have distracted from Harry's attitude and isolation. But still, it's definitely not accurate to the book. Speaking of homework, the moment they sit down to start that, Hermione is instantly distracted by Fred and George across the common room. She spots them holding a large paper bag and handing things out to innocent-looking first years. Suddenly, one by one, the first years start slumping over and falling to the floor completely unconscious. Realizing they've just been given fainting fancies, Hermione tells Ron to come with her to stop them. But Ron just sits back down and tells Harry that he thinks Hermione's got it handled. Once again, this circles back to the massive omitted subplot of Ron and Hermione being prefects. I know I've brought this up in almost every episode since they've got their badges, but it really does pop up in nearly every single chapter. The movies cut it entirely to save time, but it drastically changes the dynamic. If Hermione wasn't a prefect, she might have just yelled at them from across the room, but because she has the badge, she actually marches over to discipline them. She confronts Fred, George, and Lee Jordan, who assure her that the kids are fine as the first years begin waking up from their fainting spells. But Hermione doesn't care. She furiously tells them that they cannot test their products on first years even if they're paying them. Fred and George mockingly ask if she's going to give them detention or make them write lines, to which Hermione replies no, but she's going to write their mother. The moment she says that, the twins are absolutely horrified, taking a physical step back because they know Mrs. Weasley's wrath is far worse than any detention. Having successfully shut them down, Hermione leaves them be and heads back to Ron and Harry. Which brings us to the final detail and omission of their first day back at Hogwarts, and that is the continuation of Hermione's righteous work with Spew, or SPEW. After returning to Ron and Harry, Hermione suddenly declares that it's no use trying to do homework because she can't concentrate, and decides to just go to bed. But before she leaves, she wrenches open her bag, pulls out 2 misshapen woolly objects, and places them carefully on a table by the fireplace. She tells the boys that these are hats for the house elves that she knitted over the summer, noting that she's a slow knitter without magic, but should be able to make a lot more now that she's back at school. Ron is completely aghast, realizing that she's trying to trick the elves into picking up clothes and setting them free, pointing out that they might not actually want to be freed. Of course, Hermione gets mad at this, determined to free them regardless. Her plan is to hide the hats under trash so that when the house elves come in to clean the common room at night, they accidentally pick up the hats and are freed. I'm not totally sure on the exact logistics of whether this is a viable way to free a Hogwarts house elf, especially since Hermione isn't their true master, but considering we saw Dobby freed by accidentally catching a sock, it makes sense why Hermione thinks it'll work. However, Ron at least wants the elves to be aware of what's going on, so after Hermione heads to her dorm, he clears the trash off the hats so that they're fully visible, allowing the house elves to make their own choice. Seeing that Hermione is gone for the night, Ron rolls up his parchment and admits that there's no point in trying to finish their essays without her help anyway. So both the boys decide to just call it a night and head up to bed. Next, we have a small little omission, which is just their charms and transfiguration classes the next day. There's really less than a page devoted to this in the book, but all we learn is that they head to charms and transfiguration, and during transfiguration, they worked on vanishing spells, which Harry was unfortunately very bad at. The main takeaway here is that both Professor Flitwick and Professor McGonagall were very upfront with the students about how this year would be their hardest year yet. They make it abundantly clear that their OWL tests are extremely important, and it essentially just keeps getting beaten into them that they need to be the best students they can be. The professors act as if their entire livelihoods and future careers rest upon this single year and the OWL results that they get. I'm guessing it's comparable to our own Muggle school system with things like the ACT scores or heavy standardized tests when you're in high school or college, so the pressure is definitely on. And like I mentioned a minute ago, Hermione is still quite upset with Ron, who also called her knitted hats woolly bladders that morning. So she doesn't join Ron and Harry as they went to study in the library during lunch. Again, it's definitely the opposite of the movie, which shows Hermione willing to actually write part of Ron's essay. The class that does get more attention is Care of Magical Creatures, which brings us to our next change. Once again, the trio notices that Hagrid is missing for the 3rd day in a row as they head out to their lesson, which they share with the Slytherins, by the way. Professor Grubbly-Plank is teaching instead, and their lesson is all about bowtruckles. If you're a fan of the Fantastic Beasts franchise, then you're definitely familiar with bowtruckles, but they actually first appeared right here in the Harry Potter books. It's a pity we never got to see a lesson like this in the original movies, but really, Professor Grubbly-Plank and almost all Care of Magical Creatures classes are entirely removed from the films after The Prisoner of Azkaban. During this particular lesson, Hermione is answering all the questions correctly and earning points for Gryffindor as usual, while Parvati and Lavender are gushing over how cute the little creatures are. Harry, however, is incredibly frustrated. He hates how everyone is reacting so positively to the class, acting like Hagrid never showed them anything interesting, which he definitely did. Harry feels like people are just biased against Hagrid, and it's not that he thinks Grubbly-Plank is a bad teacher, he's just really upset and worried that his friend still hasn't returned. When the class is sent off to draw pictures of the bowtruckles, Harry walks up to Professor Grubbly-Plank and asks where Hagrid is, similar to the previous year when he asked about Hagrid after he was outed as a half-giant. And by the way, if you don't remember that, then go back and watch my Goblet of Fire episodes, since I've already covered years 1 through 4 on the channel. Anyway, Grubbly-Plank essentially tells Harry to keep his nose out of other people's business. And right after this, Draco Malfoy starts taunting Harry in an undertone, suggesting that the stupid great oaf might have gotten himself badly injured by messing with stuff that's too big for him. He specifically emphasizes the word big, which genuinely worries Harry. Since Lucius Malfoy is a Death Eater, he fears Draco might know something horrible that happened to Hagrid that the Order of the Phoenix hasn't heard about yet. Hermione insists that Dumbledore would know if something had happened, and that looking worried just plays into Malfoy's hands, but it doesn't help much. The lesson essentially ends with Harry overhearing Malfoy bragging to the other Slytherins that his father was talking to the minister just a couple of days ago, and that if Hagrid even does return, he'll probably be fired straight away. Hearing this makes Harry grip his bowtruckle a little too hard, and the creature actually cuts him, which of course only makes Crabbe, Goyle, and the rest of the Slytherins laugh even harder. Our next change is a brief omission that happens right after the Care of Magical Creatures class, as the trio heads to Herbology. They run into Luna Lovegood, who is just getting out of her own class, and she walks right up to Harry to loudly announce, in front of everybody watching, that she, her father, and the Quibbler all support him and believe his story. This is happening right as the whole school is gossiping about his outburst from the previous day regarding Cedric's murder and Voldemort's return. So while Harry is definitely glad to have someone's support, he can't help but think that if Luna is the only person publicly backing him, that's a pretty tough crowd to be associated with. But thankfully for him, Ernie Macmillan also steps up right after this and publicly declares in front of everyone that he and his family fully support Dumbledore and Harry and believe what they're saying. Since Ernie comes from a respected pureblood wizarding family, this carries a lot of weight and definitely makes Harry feel a bit better. It's just a small little moment removed from the movie, but it really helps to show how the student body is actively reacting to the smear campaign against Harry. Next, we briefly head into Herbology with Professor Sprout, who once again reminds the class about the importance of their upcoming OWL exams. But this quickly shifts as the trio heads down to dinner, bringing us to another omitted moment. Before Harry can even make it inside the Great Hall, he gets shouted at by the new captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, Angelina Johnson. She is absolutely furious because she just found out that Harry landed himself in detention with Umbridge for the entire week. Why does this matter? Well, those detentions include Friday night, which was supposed to be the Gryffindor Keeper tryouts to replace Oliver Wood. Angelina specifically wanted the entire returning team to be present to help make the decision, and Harry had previously promised that he would be there. Now, of course, he can't go. It's actually kind of a funny moment in the book because Angelina has no mercy for Harry's situation. She essentially tells him that it's entirely his own fault he's missing it and demands that he ask Umbridge to get out of Friday's detention. Harry already knows that this is pretty much an impossible task, but to get Angelina off of his back, he promises that he'll give it a try. And with that, we finally head into Harry's actual detention with Umbridge. Keep in mind, this is only the first of his detentions. As I mentioned earlier, we aren't going to break down every single one, but remember that in the book, he suffers through 4 of these from Tuesday all the way through Friday, not just a single evening like the movie portrays. Anyway, right at the start of this first detention, Harry actually does exactly what Angelina asked him to do. He bites the bullet and asks Professor Umbridge if he can postpone Friday night's detention so he can attend the Quidditch tryouts, offering to make it up the following Monday instead. Unsurprisingly, this just makes Umbridge extremely happy. She's absolutely thrilled to find out that not only is he being punished with detention, but he's also going to miss out on something he genuinely loves doing. She flat out denies his request, sadistically telling him that missing something he wants to do is a good thing because it will reinforce the lesson that he needs to learn. The next part of this detention that is slightly different is a very small detail, but it's the fact that the line doesn't appear on his left hand when he starts writing like it does in the film. In the book, the words are carved onto his right hand, which is his actual writing hand. I know it's magic, so anything is possible, but it obviously makes way more sense the way the book writes it, where the hand you're gripping the blood quill with is the one that actually gets cut into. I think they just made this change for the physical angle of the shot in the movie. It's much easier to see Umbridge, Harry, and his left hand resting on the table all at once. So I can understand the change from a filmmaking perspective, but from a logical, magical standpoint, it definitely makes far more sense for the words to be etched into the hand he's holding the quill with. Now remember, I mentioned that Harry has multiple detentions, so our next change actually picks up the following day. Because the movie didn't include any of these moments throughout the rest of the week, there are a few important details that got removed. First of all, Harry doesn't tell Ron and Hermione what Umbridge actually made him do. They just think that he's writing lines. He doesn't tell them that the words are literally cutting into his flesh, and because it was only the first session, he doesn't have the permanent scars on the back of his hand just yet. That doesn't happen until later on. The other thing we learn during this missing time is that Ron skipped doing his homework the night before because he fancied a walk, which is what he tells Hermione at least. He's obviously hiding something, but Harry doesn't want to push it considering he's also hiding the truth about his detention. Harry is kind of content to let Ron hide whatever secrets he has as long as he can keep his own secrets as well. On top of this, we read that Harry has another bad Transfiguration class, and the fifth years get even more homework piled on them from Professor McGonagall, Professor Grubbly-Plank, and Professor Sinistra, who is their astronomy teacher, by the way. And finally, Angelina Johnson is furious that Harry couldn't get out of his Friday detention, and she angrily tells him that he needs to sort out his priorities. So all of that tension and stress is building up the very next day in the book, completely unseen in the film. As we move throughout the rest of the week, we learn a lot more about his other detentions. For instance, Umbridge actually keeps him in her office until past midnight every time. It's a completely silent, psychological battle, with Harry refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. He says nothing to her besides good evening when he arrives and good night when he leaves. But this massive time commitment means that his homework situation is drastically getting worse. With his nights completely occupied by these grueling detentions, he barely has any time to do the mountain of assignments his fifth-year teachers keep piling on. The physical toll is getting worse too. Finally, by his Thursday night detention, the magical cuts on his hand stop healing over and just continue to bleed even when he finishes writing. After seeing this, Umbridge decides that the message is finally starting to sink in, and tells him that just one more night should do the trick. Which brings me to our next massive omission, which happens on Harry's walk back to Gryffindor Tower after that grueling Thursday night detention. As he's sneaking through the dark corridors past midnight, he actually runs into Ron, who is trying to hide his broomstick. Remember that secret Ron was hiding earlier when he fancied a walk? Well, he finally confesses to Harry that he's been sneaking out to the Quidditch pitch at night to practice because he desperately wants to try out for the Gryffindor keeper position. And now, because Ron was vulnerable and shared his closely guarded secret, Harry feels like he needs to return the favor. So he finally shows Ron his hand, revealing the words "I must not tell lies" sliced into his flesh. Ron is furious. He immediately tells Harry that he needs to go straight to Dumbledore or McGonagall to report Umbridge. But of course, stubborn Harry completely refuses. Now this is a huge change from the film because if you remember the movie scene, Harry's hand is discovered in the common room with Hermione present, and she's the one urging him to report it. But in the book, Hermione isn't even around for this conversation. It's just a really great, intimate moment between the two best friends where they both lay their insecurities and secrets out on the table. Which brings us to his final night of detention on Friday. Because Ron had just confessed his secret about trying out for the Gryffindor keeper position the night before, Harry actually scoots his chair just a fraction of an inch toward the window during his detention so he can peek out at the Quidditch pitch and try to check on how Ron is doing. But the real climax of this Friday detention, and honestly the climax of the entire chapter that the movie completely misses, happens right at the end of the night. Umbridge grabs Harry's hand to check on his progress, and the exact moment that she touches him, a searing pain shoots through the scar on his forehead. This completely freaks Harry out. The last time his scar hurt when a teacher touched him was back in his first year with Professor Cuarón, who was literally sharing a body with the Dark Lord. Given how pure evil Umbridge has been to him all week, Harry walks away from this detention formulating an insane but honestly somewhat logical theory that Dolores Umbridge might actually be possessed by Lord Voldemort. And finally, that brings us to the very last omission of today's episode, which happens when Harry returns to Gryffindor Tower after that Friday night detention. First of all, I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth repeating. The movie shows Ron and Hermione getting along perfectly here, with Hermione even offering to help him with his essay. In the book, that couldn't be further from the truth, as they're pretty much always arguing. But despite the bickering, there is some massive good news. We find out that Ron actually made keeper for the Gryffindor Quidditch team. This is a huge plot point that the movies completely ignore until the Half-Blood Prince, but it actually happens right here in his 5th year. It's during this celebration that Hermione finally finds the truth out about the blood quill and what Umbridge has been doing to Harry's hand. Just like Ron did the night before, she urgently tells Harry that he needs to report this to someone. On top of that, Harry confides in them about his scar hurting when Umbridge touched him, which prompts Hermione to insist that he go straight to Dumbledore. Of course, stubborn, angst-filled Harry completely refuses to talk to the headmaster. Instead, he decides that he wants to write a letter to Sirius to ask for advice on the whole Umbridge and Voldemort possession theory. Hermione points out that Voldemort already has a body, which Harry saw, so there's no reason for him to possess Umbridge. Plus, there's been plenty of times when Umbridge has been alone with Harry, so why hasn't she just finished him off? Regardless, Hermione quickly shuts down the idea to write to Sirius, warning Harry that it simply isn't safe to send owls right now because the Ministry is likely intercepting mail in and out of Hogwarts. And that wraps up all of the changes for today's episode. What book-to-movie difference stuck out to you most this week? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, if you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe, and check out the series playlist on my channel to catch up on any episodes that you might have missed so far. Also, I want you to remember that you are appreciated, you matter, and Jesus loves you. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next video.